Donald Trump has invited Australia to join his new Board of Peace, a Trump-led body he says will help bring peace to Gaza.
Of a new international oversight body, the Board of Peace, we call it, the Board of Peace, sort of a beautiful name, the Board of Peace, which will...
But the invitation comes with a warning. Some leaders say the board could undermine the United Nations, and Trump himself has suggested it might even replace it.
Do you want your Board of Peace to replace the UN?
Well, it might. I mean, the UN just hasn't been very helpful. I'm a big fan of the UN potential, but it has never lived up to its potential. The UN should have...
Trump has spent years attacking the United Nations as ineffective. And this term, his administration has moved to pull the US out of dozens of UN agencies. So is this a peace plan or a power play? I'm Daniel James, and you're listening to 7am. Today, UN analyst at international crisis group Maya Ungar on the real agenda behind Trump's Board of Peace and whether Australia would be wise to join. It's Friday, January 23. You've been reading the charter for Donald Trump's so-called Board of Peace. So tell me about the board and what's laid out in this draft document.
So the Board of Peace was originally authorized by the UN Security Council in November, meant to oversee the future of the peace process in Gaza. The charter document that we have seen sent out to countries with invitations to join this week is a much more expansive version of what was originally authorized, and I think it shocked many. Now, the charter is actually quite short for a new type of international institution or organization, and the thing that is clearest is that it is meant to formalize and institutionalize Donald Trump's power as kind of the chairman or head of a new organization. It's not the United States, it's not set to a particular term, but instead he has the power to be chairman of this for life.
The leaders of the Arab world and Israel and everybody involved asked me to do this, so it would be headed by a gentleman known as President Donald J. Trump of the United States. That's what I want to...
Something important to note is even though the Board of Peace's authorization has to do with Gaza, the charter itself doesn't mention it. It explains the fact that it is meant to be a new institution to solve threats essentially to international peace and security. But I think there's still a big question for many as to why this has come now. You know, Trump has critiqued international organizations like the UN Security Council, the primary body that deals with international peace and security, for being unable to really step up in the face of major conflicts. And we have seen that. It's a fair critique across the board, from Gaza to Ukraine to Sudan, that the politics of the council has meant that the legitimacy of it as a, effective body has really reduced. But I think many are still unsure about the actual aims, how expansive this is. We have a kind of Gaza board which goes under the broader board. Is this going to be replicated against other contexts? There's much to still be seen.
So is this Trump trying to actually replace the UN itself? Because it reads much, like you said, less like a Gaza-specific organisation, more like a founding charter of a new international body. Is that what he's trying to do here?
So U.S. officials have said that he is not trying to replace the UN Security Council, but this is not an alternative, but something that will act in parallel. When he's talked about it, he has been clear to say, the UN is not effective, and therefore we need bodies like this.
I wish the United Nations could do more. I wish we didn't need a Board of Peace, but the United Nations, and with all the wars I settled, the United Nations never helped me on one war.
Now, the Board of Peace itself, though, is only, even if it replicated the work of the Security Council, it's only one very small part of the broader UN system. The Security Council deploys over 60,000 peacekeepers. It oversees 14 different sanctions regimes. It writes and helps to delegate mandates for humanitarian operations, which help provide for millions of people around the globe. And it has an immense amount of resourcing, even if the organization is in financial crisis right now. The Board of Peace, as it is laid out, while it seeks to bring world leaders together to have dialogue, with President Trump having the ultimate veto, it doesn't really outline how it would replace many of these critical functions.
And Donald Trump has sent a copy of this draft charter alongside a letter of invitation to about 60 countries. Who has he invited and what has the response largely been?
So it's a mix of countries that he's invited. Some are his close friends, such as Argentinian President Milei and Hungarian President Orban. Others are traditional American allies, from the French to the Canadians to the Norwegians. And others are, the great powers that we see in the world. Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping each received invitations. I think that the reception has been varied, we'll say to the least. You have some countries who have enthusiastically joined on board. Those are Trump's friends like Hungary, Argentina, Kazakhstan. You have others who have more cautiously signed on while still trying to reaffirm the principles that were authorized under for the continuation of the peace process in Gaza. The Arab countries like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Egypt, and others kind of put a joint statement affirming this. And then you have some like France, like Sweden, who have said, no, we're going to decline this invitation. This is not under the tenets of an international system that we agree with.
This morning, French President Emmanuel Macron has rejected President Donald Trump's invitation to join a proposed board of peace overseeing Gaza, citing concerns it could undermine the United Nations.
That's all right. What I'll do is, if they feel like Costo, I'll put a 200% tariff on his wines and champagnes.
Australia has also been invited but is yet to accept this invitation. Just speculating here, Maya, is it in Australia's interest to accept this invitation?
I don't think it is in Australia's interest to accept the invitation. I think it's in Australia's interest to take the approach that, for example, Canada has done, which is to not outright turn down the invitation, therefore potentially triggering retaliatory tariffs or actions, but instead to set preconditions that are not actually going to be met. The Canadians have set preconditions related to the spending of this $1 billion that Trump has talked about in order to gain permanent membership on the Board of Peace. And it's unlikely that Trump would accede to these demands. And so likely the Canadians are going to be able to say, well, we're not declining, but we're just waiting for these changes to be made. Because all world leaders are having to negotiate this balance where this is a deeply unfair international board, which premises Trump above all else and allows him to make decisions to shut down the decisions of every other world leader. But at the same time, he has shown it very clear that he's vindictive when leaders don't sign up to what he wants.
And what has the reaction been from the UN, Maya?
There has been a lot of quiet concern in the hallways of the UN over the past couple of days. I'm based here in New York, and it is the number one thing that everyone is talking about in the UN itself. There is a feeling that this is a threat to the very nature of the international order that has been set up in the post-World War era. The UN is at a state of crisis as it is, both a financial and a legitimacy crisis, and it is increasingly kind of boxed out of mediation and political efforts. Part of this is the UN's fault itself. It has shown itself to be a weak actor under the Secretary General, but part of it is the fact that other member states, including and especially President Trump, have not opened up the space for the UN to kind of play that political role. So I think there's a lot of concern that this is a formalization of a pattern that we've been seeing over the past year, and even farther than that.
Coming up, what happens to Gaza if the Board of Peace falls to pieces? Well, Donald Trump has been pitching this as a response to UN failure and has been a long vocal critic of the UN Security Council. Where does that criticism stem from?
So Donald Trump's political and foreign policy approach is that these institutions should, more than anything else, fit American interests. He says the United States is the country that pays in the most to the institution, and it should run in accordance with the way that the United States think it should. Now, the way that the Security Council structure is set up means that there are 5 countries with permanent vetoes. The U.S. has one of those, but China, Russia, the United Kingdom, and France also have veto power, though France and the UK actually haven't used theirs since 1989. And so the U.S. have found themselves frustrated over being unable to pursue some of the policies that they see in their interest because of the Russian and Chinese use of the vetoes. In the same way, many member states critique the Security Council because they see it as an unfair institution. The fact that the United States has a veto, for example. And so there's been decades of the majority of countries in the world pushing for Security Council reform. But this Board of Peace is 3, 4, 5 steps back from what they're asking for. It's moving in the opposite direction of what they've been campaigning.
So the way that the board is drafted at the moment doesn't go anywhere near fixing the complaints of the UN Security Council?
I mean, there are different critiques about the Security Council. One is a very real critique about its effectiveness. And it is true that a body with one unilateral leader is going to be more effective about pushing policy through than one that is meant to come to agreement among 15 members and must come to agreement among at least 9 with no veto of the permanent 5. But at the same time, if these decisions are not with the entirety of world membership, if not all of the countries involved are there, if it doesn't hold the legitimacy of being based in international law and the charter and tenets of the system, then how effective is it actually going to be? And on the other big critique of the Security Council, which is that it is an unequal institution, which reinforces existing power dynamics, I mean, this is going even farther down that route.
And despite being initially critical of this body, Benjamin Netanyahu has agreed to join. How significant is that?
I think it's something that many of us are watching because the fact that the Board of Peace itself does not have any Palestinians on its executive board, and you haven't seen the state of Palestine being invited to join this. So I think many are concerned about the implications that that will have. And I do think that Netanyahu will absolutely try to leverage his position on the Board of Peace to further influence policy on Gaza. But Netanyahu has a direct line to Trump anyways, and I don't think being one member on a broader Board of Peace is going to increase his leverage more than being able to just pick up the phone and call Donald Trump any time of day.
Maya, we are currently seeing a huge fragmentation of what you could call the old order. What's the likelihood that this does actually shape up to be a rival to the UN Security Council, or at least undermine its work moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, if this Board of Peace does get off the ground, it will be a point of fracture for the international system as we understand it. I can't imagine a scenario in which you actually have Russia and China, these big powers who hold vetoes within the Security Council, actually signing up to this. So I think if it does get off the ground, the biggest likelihood is it just becomes a club of Trump's friends. And so you have negotiations, you have discussions, but more than anything, you have disunity increasingly in the system. You know, the Security Council has many issues, and I'm one of the first to critique it. That's kind of my job. But it is the place where all countries can come together to discuss issues across a table. And when you have a further fracturing of that system, when you move people away from that ability for dialogue and cooperation, it is only going to make compromise and diplomacy more difficult.
And finally, Maya, what does this mean for peace in Gaza?
I think this is a big question mark because when we originally had envisioned the Board of Peace, it was meant to help to solve, moving forward the peace process in Gaza. But if the Board of Peace fails to get off the ground, it could also have reciprocal implications on the peace process in Gaza as well. If the Board of Peace falls apart at the executive level, do the technical committees fall apart? Does the executive board for Gaza fall apart? Where are we at? Are we going to see an increase in Israeli attacks? It's a really big concern. And I think for those following the conflict quite closely, there is actually a feeling that there needs to be an investment in this Board of Peace to allow the further process to move forward. And that's why you saw all of these Arab leaders sign on to it.
Maya, thank you so much for speaking with us.
Thanks for having me.
Also in the news, the coalition has officially split, with Nationals leader David Littleproud declaring the partnership untenable after a mass resignation from the shadow front bench. Liberal leader Susan Lee is under growing pressure with some in the Liberal Party suggesting her leadership may not survive the fallout in wake of hate speech legislation passing through both houses of Parliament in response to the Bondi attack. We'll have a full recap of the week in Parliament tomorrow with Amy Remekis. And a 15-year-old boy has been arrested after allegedly yelling threats and anti-Semitic abuse at a group of students in Melbourne. Police say the boy was in a vehicle that nearly struck one of the students as it ran a red light. The arrested teen is also being questioned over other offences, including aggravated burglary and vehicle theft. A second suspect is also being sought. I'm Daniel James. You've been listening to 7am. We'll be back tomorrow.